You are listening to Take on Life. This is your host, Dr. Dan Continenza. Okay, everybody, get ready for an incredible conversation with Isabel Friend, who is an absolutely brilliant and knowledgeable teacher on the subject of water in all of its power and mystery and intelligence, and the ways in which our relationship to water can help heal ourselves and our world. After you're done listening to this conversation, you're definitely going to want to check her out on the internet. So you can go to waterislife.love to check out her videos and blogs and other resources, and waterislife.teachable.com for her e-courses. When you go to waterislife.teachable.com to sign up for an e-course, you can use the discount code TakeOnLife to get 20% off either the intro course or the special practitioner course, and I encourage you to do that for sure. Now, before you dive in, I want to let you know that the audio is a little bit wonky. My computer was not recording our Zoom conversation smoothly, nor was my microphone working properly. So I did my best to edit it as well as possible, and you will still get everything you need and enjoy the conversation thoroughly, I'm sure. So get ready to have your entire relationship to water reorganized to a completely new level of understanding. Hello and welcome, Isabel. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Dan. I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to have our conversation today. So I'm just going to start off by setting the stage with an idea. And the idea is that if we had a new perspective that could unify us and help us move past our disconnection from ourselves and each other and from nature, then we could heal what is obviously a strong and growing divide, I think, in our human nature and our relationship to nature. So the overarching question I have for you is definitely surrounding water. And it is how does our relationship to water mirror our current plight of disconnection and disunity, both as humans and in relationship to nature? And is there something we can learn from water that can help us change our relationship to how we use it and that will help us heal our fractured state as humans? So that's the big question, right? And so hopefully that's where we'll go for the whole conversation here.
That is a really big question. And I think that is really the ultimate question that we as humanity, we have to ask ourselves now, because water is life. And as we're confronting all of these questions of life or death and the meaning of life, we have to turn to water for answers and solutions. And, that can be in a very philosophical and sort of grand, esoteric kind of way. Or it can be very granular and very specific and very practical in terms of, our relationship to the economy and to energy and to social dynamics and to politics and to agriculture and all of these various aspects of life. Water as the body of life itself holds answers to all of those. So I love that your question is so grand and broad, and yet there's so many directions that can go with it.
Right. And obviously, you've created so much content around water itself. Obviously, we're not going to get to the depth of each and every one of those just here today. I love that you brought up the philosophical and abstract, possibility, as well as the super practical and down to earth. And I hope to get a little bit of both of that in. So just for the listeners, I want to make sure by the end here that we talk about some very, very specific things of what can you actually do with the water in your life, literally, and your relationship to it. Help make some changes starting today, tomorrow. So we'll get there. Yeah, and I'd like to take a big philosophical approach to things, because I think it helps us, bring the whole of ourselves to the conversation, rather than assuming that we're able to fracture ourselves into parts and then still solve problems from a reductionist standpoint. So let's start here. So I've heard you say in the past that, it's a huge issue for us to generally identify water as an inanimate object and really take it for granted for what it is. And so why is that a problem? Just the issue itself of identifying water as inanimate. And what is that relationship, or what is that view actually doing to us in a harmful way? And where should we go from there?
That's a great question. So I'm going to mirror your strategy here of going from the sort of the grand and philosophical all the way down to the more specific in answering it. So on a grand philosophical scale, water is the body of consciousness itself. When life wants to incarnate in physical form, it does so through the body of water. And so we have to recognize that everywhere in the universe, there's water without life, but nowhere is there life without water. And some of the ancient indigenous philosophies and teachings and understandings about water are now being echoed in our findings in quantum laboratories. And even in recent discoveries in physics and cosmology, we're starting to see that water behaves unlike anything else in the entire universe. It doesn't apply by the normal laws of physics. It doesn't behave like anything else. And that's largely because it is in itself a life force, the form of life. And the Kogi tribe in Colombia, for example, they have an incredibly elaborate system of teachings and understandings about water. And one of their primary teachings is that water holds the blueprint for reality. For all states of reality, water is the holographic map through which consciousness projects itself to create the world and our perception of the world. Whether we're talking about physical reality or states of dreaming or medicine journeys or any experience that we have through water. I mean, your brain, for example, is resting in a pool of water, and even the brain tissue itself is mostly water, and it's has a lot to do with the structure, the electrical conductivity, the mineral profile, and all these various aspects of the phase of water that even just determines your state of mental health, your state of physical health, your state of spiritual health. You know, Dr. Zach Bush says you cannot have a spiritual experience if you're dehydrated. And because we see water as an inanimate object, we are all collectively dehydrated personally in our physical bodies, and we're also dehydrating the planet with drought and desertification. And it's because if you treat water as an inanimate object, she becomes that. She's always reflecting us back to ourselves. What we do to water, we do to ourselves. What we do to our inner waters happens to our outer waters in the planet as well. So there's a big distinction between living water and dead water. And most of what we encounter in our lives is dead water, or what they in laboratories they call it bulk water. And it doesn't have life force energy. It's not capable of conducting electrical current, and we are electromagnetic beings. So we need that conductivity. We need that crystallinity in our bio water, and the planet needs that as well. You know, she needs water that is crystalline in her ecosystems in order for the hydrological cycle to stay in balance. So when we treat water as an inanimate object, she literally dies. She literally becomes inert and unconscious. Of course, she can come back to life. There are ways to revive her. And I think that's really where our focus needs to be. If we want a life of thriving ecosystems and thriving humans on this planet, then we have to start focusing on what is the essence of vivacity. And that has everything to do with water.
Beautiful. That's amazing. Yeah. Wow. So just to kind of really bring it home here, so for my own sake, you know, we can take a water molecule. And I suppose we're not saying that the molecule itself is something other than water. It is water. But that's what's so special about it, is that it is water. And it's when it's in a certain proper relationship. You mentioned the crystalline structure of the water. When it has this proper relationship, it kind of, it comes alive. Right, it comes alive with its own ability to transmit consciousness and have an imprint of information from when. Where does that imprint come from, and what kind of imprint is it carrying with it?
Well, I love that you just used the term relationship, because that's really what it's all about, you know, and in starting to just begin to scratch the meniscus of understanding water's strange behaviors. You know, we tend to think of it as just the simplest and most ubiquitous substance on the planet, but there are over 63 anomalies about water that science doesn't yet understand, ways that it behaves that just baffle scientists. But in starting to understand its odd behavior, we're really realizing that looking at H2O molecules singularly is the wrong approach, right? That's like trying to study one human being to understand humanity as a whole. That just doesn't work. But like humanity, water is a community of individuals that interlock and interweave in relationship patterns that we call molecular structures. And these various molecular structures are what give them unique social behaviors, just like the relationships that human beings form between one another, the family relationships, the romantic relationships, the friendships. These all form structures and patterns of behavior that we call a culture or a community, while water also forms culture and community depending on the structures and the vibrational influences that it has. So, when these molecules congregate in a certain way, it's actually not solid, liquid, or gas. It's actually a fourth phase of water beyond these three. You can call it exclusion zone water. You can call it biological water, because the water in every living being is this bio water, this crystalline water. To some extent, it shifts over time depending on our health and our age and all of that, which I think is really the key to understanding health. But the point is that at this point, it's no longer H2O at all. It's H3O2. The water that's inside you is not the same as the water in your glass. Otherwise, you would just be a puddle on the floor. This is a gel form of water that can communicate and transfer information, because the hydrogen atoms form these electrostatic bonds. They form these relationships, whereas the bulk, unstructured, dead water that most of us drink is the hydrogens are forming and breaking apart their bonds billions of times per second. So there's no time for them to snuggle up and talk to each other and communicate information. We know that for any good relationship, there has to be good communication, right? So when you do have these clusters, these little communities of water molecules, each cluster has about 440,000 panels on it. Each cluster. And that's just the smallest unit that we've measured. These crystals are actually fractal in nature. So if we had microscopes stronger than atomic force or electron microscopes, we would be able to see that there are actually even more panels than that. But what we've been able to measure is around 440,000 panels. And what's significant about that is each one of these panels is responsible for sensing, storing, transducing, transmitting information about its environment, be that electromagnetic influence, visual stimuli, auditory stimuli. It's particularly sensitive to human emotion. There's a researcher named There's a researcher, Theodore Schwenk, who he called water the sensory organ of the earth, because when it's in this phase, it behaves with a principle called quantum coherence, where not only can it receive vibratory information just like a crystal, it can store vibratory information just like a crystal, it can transmute one kind of energy into another kind of energy, which we call transduction, just like a crystal, and that can also focus and channel and amplify that energy as well. And then it can communicate that over really vast distances. So the difference between structured and unstructured water is like the difference between coal or a diamond. Either way, it's just carbon atoms, right? But the way that those atoms come together determine whether or not it's a lump of coal or this beautiful, brilliant diamond. And we have to start understanding that the difference between health and sickness is mostly the difference between coal water or diamond water in our bodies.
Right.
And, for anyone who says like, oh, structure doesn't matter, this water is the same as that water. Well, try proposing to your girlfriend with a lump of coal. I'm pretty sure she's not going to be too happy about that.
Right. Well, and there's so many reasons that that's a kind of a ridiculous stance. I mean, we know already, just looking at a snowflake, that water can take on different properties of structure and beauty and inherent beauty. We look at a snowflake, and everyone in the world knows that there's this beauty to it that seems to express some sort of message. And to be able to look at that and then turn around and say, oh, but the water in my glass doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many chemicals are in it. It doesn't matter if it's been sitting in a tank somewhere, so on and so forth. So it should be obvious to us that there could be this amazing different level relationship, next level relationship we have to it, and that it could be transmitting whole worlds of information to us, just like it can present it, in an artistic fashion.
Yeah, I think there's a really close correlation between beauty and divinity. I think the more coherence and symmetry something has, the more sacred geometry is imbued in it, the closer it is in alignment with, the natural forces of nature and the forces of the universe. And sacred geometry is kind of this vessel through which life takes shape in the physical world. And it does that primarily through the body of water, taking these shapes from the atomic level to the molecular level to the bigger forms of snowflakes, the more structured and the more coherent your water is, the closer you're resonating in harmony with health and divinity and vivacity. And what's interesting is when you do have water that's in this state, when it's very coherent like this, very structured, very artistic, beautiful, she is expressive. She is life expressing herself in form. And I think with our Western minds, our generally left brain reductivist way of seeing things in our culture, I think one of the best analogies to look at it is as a computer, because computers of course use ones and zeros, and with those ones and zeros you can transmit all of the information on the whole internet and everything in the technological world. But if you look at hydrogen and oxygen actually has 6 different valence states, and if you were to translate that into how much information it can store, each and every water molecule can store about 1 billion times more information than even the world's most advanced computer. So she really stores all of the Akashic records, all of the memory of the entire universe, not just this planet Earth, but all of the memory. So when we tune into that, there's no limit at all. There's so many potentials and possibilities for free energy, for levitation, for extrasensory perceptions, for divination. I mean, really, this is the technology of the future in every way, from agriculture to medicine to energy, you name it.
Well, imagine that the technology of the future is actually embedded in our deep history and past and in nature itself. And it's no surprise to me, and I think it's probably no surprise to a lot of people if they really think about it in a certain way. There's a few things you mentioned that I want to branch off in a couple different directions. But first, a really cool thing you're doing here, you're referring to water as she, and I want to pause on that and have you kind of just tell me, why are you doing that? What's your feeling there with the identification of water?
Well, I think it's really important that we stop referring to water as an it, because the way that we speak about things, of course, patterns the way that we see things and the way that we perceive the world. And so we need to start recognizing her as a conscious entity that we have a relationship with. When you drink water, you're not just tasting the water, she's also tasting you. When you see water, you're not just seeing the water, she's also seeing you. And I say she in particular, as opposed to he, mostly because English doesn't have any gender neutral pronouns, but also because cross-culturally, pretty much in every culture throughout history, water has been considered a feminine form. And again, to mention the Kogi from Colombia, they say that water is the mother, but it's not a perfect analogy, because unlike our mother, our human mother, we actually never left water's womb. We are still within water's womb. We are still floating in the amniotic fluid of her motherhood. She's holding us all the time. I mean, we're 70% water by volume. I think we all know that. But what most people don't realize is we are 99.95% water molecules. And so we literally carry oceans within us. The only way we were able to leave the oceans back in the Cambrian period, when vertebrates first started to develop, was by carrying the oceans within them as their own bloodstream. And so the ocean itself has this very maternal aspect, this very maternal being. We call her Almar, the mother, the mare. And the Kogi also say that we should relate with her as though she is the most beautiful woman in the world. So for men, that can sometimes, in the Kogi tradition, that can sometimes take the form of seeing water as your lover, as your beloved, as your wife, and really giving her that level of honor and respect. And as women, it's really seeing ourselves reflected in her and giving her that level of honor and respect, or seeing her as our mother, our sister. And I think that kind of really shifts your relationship, not just with the water that is in its clear liquid form, but also the water that's in every plant that you encounter, that's in every animal that you encounter, the water that, rains from the sky, the water that you make when you go to the bathroom, the water that you make when you cry, the water that you are all of the time. It shifts your perception from being a Homo sapien to being an aqua sapien.
I love that. That's really powerful. So personally, I've actually been exploring the Christian Bible, and it's interesting for me to find that in a religion that tends to downplay nature, literally stripping it of an identity, I'm actually finding in even the Bible that Lady Wisdom is likened to the tree of life, which was present with the Creator at the beginning of time, and is the creative principle with which all of nature was manifest. Which was mind blowing to me, because I grew up in this religious context where, again, nature and the feminine are really downplayed. And that's even an understatement, in most Christian heritages. And it's amazing to me to actually find these same echoes even there in the Old and New Testament of the Bible. So just thought it was a really cool.
Oh yeah.
So an amazing way to see that it's literally everywhere.
It's everywhere. And there's so much of it in religion, in all religions, but Christianity in particular is interesting because when you start to view it through the lens of water, Christianity is actually such a water-based religion. I mean, look at the very first words of Genesis. It says, in the beginning, there was nothing. And then God moved over the face of the waters. And he said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters above from the waters below. So even in the Christian Bible, the first thing that they thought was more important to say before anything else was, in the beginning was God and water. And when you start to see water as this feminine principle, you realize that Christianity isn't just a paternalistic religion. If you look at what it actually says and not the interpretations, it's saying in the beginning was a masculine and feminine. There was this presence, this force that we call God. And then there was this creative principle of this cosmic water that through which God was able to create everything.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
In Europe, of course, the worship of water long predates Christianity, but then it was sort of adapted to become part of Christian rituals. Water worship started hiding behind a new facade, like baptism and hand washing and all of that. And if you look at the original followers of Christ, even the Old Testament and the Torah, water was magical and water was revered. And there's actually 4 or 5 different kinds of water, specific, distinct kinds of water that the Bible refers to. So there was the cosmic water, which was this primal force that only God could control, which was integral to creation and the universal balance between chaos and order. And it's this chaos that God overcame to create the manifested world. And then it also talks about the cosmic sea, which the Bible says is like the seat of God's throne. It's this undifferentiated realm from which God created heaven and earth. And then it talks about living water, which is a physical liquid on earth. It's a source of life. It's a gift from God, but it's different. It's distinctly different from ordinary water, which again is echoed in many traditions. And we're finding that in labs as well. Living water is very different from ordinary water. And it even talks about this in the Bible. And then the fourth is ceremonial water, holy water, which was used for exorcisms and baptisms and births and every aspect of spiritual life from birth until death. And it is not described as living water, but it's described as like a surrogate to represent living water. And what I think is really interesting about, I'm not a Christian personally, but yeah, I was also raised that way, and our culture is so influenced by Christianity that I just find it really interesting to look into this. And what we're finding in physics now is that dark matter and dark energy, which create and make up the entire universe, I mean, they're all pervasive everywhere and transcend time and space. It actually behaves exactly like the cosmic water and the cosmic sea that the Bible and so many other religions and ancient traditions refer to. In fact, in physics, they're not even calling it dark energy and dark matter anymore. They're starting to call it dark fluid because it behaves just like fluid. And it really is this primordial, energetic, all-pervasive ocean.
Yeah, imagine that with these ancient wisdom traditions actually knew something that we're yet to discover today. And you mentioned that earlier too, that if we could only see deeper, then we would find even more amazing, unanswerable questions that would pop up and just boggle our minds. And, I think a lot of people would think, maybe not people hearing this episode right now, because I think my listeners are open-minded and to begin with, but even so people would hear this about water and think, okay, what's the big deal? Come on, it's literally just this clear fluid that tastes like nothing. There's nothing to it, right? But you actually mentioned, and it's almost like people would think of this as like this weird sci-fi version of water that certainly can't be real. And yet science fiction is one of the most brilliant methods that we have of envisioning that which is truer than what our current scientific understanding can embody. And I think there's a value in looking at this and saying, wow, yeah, what is the science fiction potential of our relationship to water, right? And you're speaking about it. So
absolutely. Yeah. Some of the ways that water behaves are just like surreal. They're just supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, it is almost unbelievable, but I think that's one of the reasons why we haven't heard of it, why it's not, front page news. Like it should be common knowledge, I would think, that the substance that we're made of behaves with quantum properties
mm-hmm.
that are, just surreal. But I think it's not, because inherent in water is this powerful supercomputer capable of infinite information storage, capable of levitation, capable of free energy. And free energy, I think, is the most destabilizing thing to the current paradigm, to the capitalistic system. If there's a self-regenerating resource that is abundantly available to all people, mm-hmm. and we start understanding how to help water to regenerate herself and how to make her more abundant on this planet, that empowers every single human being to be a master of their own fate and destiny. It empowers people to be a body of water, living on a body of water, and the personal access to infinite life force energy that implies. Some of the supernatural things, for example, like the Oak Ridge National Laboratory was finding that in water's quantum state, it can actually pass through solid walls. A water molecule can pass through solid walls. A water molecule can occupy up to 6 different locations in space at the same time. So it can bilocate, it can sextilocate. And I think that provides some really interesting keys into maybe some of the cities or abilities that ancient yogis had. Because when we look at some of the yogis from India, or some of the masters, be it Jesus or Buddha or Krishna or whomever, there are all these stories about how they were able to do these incredible things, like walk on water, or part the Red Sea, or pass through solid walls, or appear in multiple locations at the same time. And the more I learn about water, the more I realize that it is that relationship with water that allows us to have miraculous abilities and capabilities, because water itself is actually liquid light. So water is basically almost entirely made of photons, right? And all of the spiritual masters, they say, you are light, meditate on the light within you, become a ray of pure light. There's all these light analogies. And I think what they don't realize that they're catching on to is that, when you're talking about one single water molecule, it's about 974,600,000,000 parts photons to 1 part matter. So that 1 part matter is the hydrogen and oxygen. And then basically, 900 billion. So we're talking about a trillion. So it's like 1 trillion parts photons, 1 trillion parts light to 1 part matter. A photon is a boson, and the bosons are the glue that hold matter together, and they're intimately connected with that quantum field of dark fluid that we discussed before. So water is in this constant communion. It's really the medium between the manifest and the unmanifest, and it does so through the energy of light that it holds in its body. Mm-hmm. It's really the most divine substance in existence that we'll ever come into contact with. That's why the reverence for it is so important, because when you touch water, especially if it's structured crystalline water, you're not just touching water, you're touching the fabric of reality and life itself. You are affecting as the Kogi say, you're affecting the map of reality in a holographic way. And that's why I think we can affect the world as a whole more impactfully through water than through anything else. Mm-hmm.
Great. Yeah. So let's talk about that real quickly at a very personal level. How does someone do this? How do you touch living water? Where is it? How do you find it? Because if I live in some sort of urban or suburban or any area, and I'm drinking well water, tap water, bottled water, is the water I'm touching structured? Is it alive? How do I find this water?
Yeah, no, generally it's not. But there are ways that you can bring it back to life. And that is a whole topic. I actually have a 7-day e-course on that. Well, it doesn't have to be 7 days. It's like a mini course. Some people have done it twice in one night. They just get addicted to it. But it goes into all of the details of like specifically the strategies to alchemize water into living water. But I'll just say the easiest way, the most accessible way, and the most affordable way, because it's free, is to go straight to the source itself. And, pretty much everywhere, you might not realize how close your local spring is, but there are springs almost everywhere. I mean, I used to live in New York City, and there was a spring on Staten Island. You know, there are springs in LA. It doesn't matter where you live. I used to live in the desert in Santa Fe, and there were springs there. So you can go to findaspring.com. Or you can check your local U.S. Geological Survey, or you can go to Gaia GPS, or you can just ask the elders in your area, because we're really only 1 or 2 generations apart from this being a really, really common practice. And I think this has been one of the biggest travesties of our modern era, is that people are so disconnected with the way that water weaves them into their watersheds, weaves them into the fabric of life, weaves them into the web of nature and our local ecosystem and our local environment, because water is what ties us to the earth. And all of our ancestors, for literally hundreds of thousands of years, even before we were Homo sapiens sapiens, we recognize, we had this communion, we had this relationship of water as it emerges from the ground and then immediately becomes part of our body. And now you talk to people about harvesting their water, you know, wild crafting raw, wild living water from the earth, and they're like, ew, is that safe? Shouldn't I drink it from a bottle? It's like, no, you know, people who drink mostly from water bottles, we're actually consuming a credit card's worth of plastic every single week. And yet we're so domesticated that we have this idea that because that water is also domesticated, because it's also been made to sit still, just like human beings are made to sit still. It's been isolated from other water, just like human beings are being isolated. It's been set in a container, just like we spend our lives inside. It's been highly processed and highly refined through these various unnatural practices like reverse osmosis and distillation and all these different things, and UV treatment and blah, 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 that, you know, it's so unnatural. And that's kind of where we are in our relationship to our own wildness as well. So that's why it's so important when you start drinking wild water, not only do you become more intelligent, because when water is in a formation, it stores information, but you also become more tuned into your own true nature. You know, whatever we do to water, we do to ourselves. And when you consume domesticated water, you become more domesticated. We have to restore this primary relationship with the source of life itself. And it is a pilgrimage to do so. It's an honor to do so. It's a privilege to do so. It's a ceremony to do so. And that's why, you know, I just really encourage your listeners to take on this practice and to take it seriously. We're accustomed to seeing water as a convenience. Like, you know, it should come out of the tap like a thing because I want it. Versus I'm going to make this pilgrimage to have a relationship with life being born into the world. And even if it takes an hour to drive to your local spring, which it probably won't, depending on where you live, but even if it takes an hour to drive there, you know, who doesn't drive an hour to go to the airport, right? Like it is worth it. You can fill up enough water to last you an entire month, even in one journey to the spring.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And so just really quick, if anyone missed that, if you're drinking out of plastic, stop drinking out of plastic.
Stop.
Then there's so many more levels and steps to that. And yeah, I definitely will have you tell more about how people can get in touch with your teachings and your wisdom at the end here. And I'll put some links in the show as well. Because that's hugely valuable information. Just want to interject my own story real quick. When I was living in Georgia, going to chiropractic school, my now wife, Christian, and I used to drive an hour and 15 minutes each way to Western Georgia. So any Atlanteans out there, take note. Cave Springs, Georgia, provided, oh my gosh, this water, it really changed my life. I never knew that water was something you could crave. I never knew water was something you could enjoy, that you would want to drink more, and that you weren't supposed to feel dehydrated 100% of your life, that you weren't supposed to have a feeling in your mouth of having this like dry chalkiness in your mouth all the time because your water was not hydrated, right? And so after several years of doing just what you said, driving in once a month, gathering about 30 gallons of water and drinking exclusively that water, we've taken on the use of some technology to create some energetic fields and motion to our well water. And it has made a huge difference, a massive difference. I'm not going to go into any more detail because I want people to really explore this themselves and figure out what they need to do for them. So just on a very, very simple level. So it's fair to say that if you're drinking bottled water, tap water, even well water, that it doesn't matter if you drink half gallon or a gallon a day. Like you're not doing the thing you hope you're doing. Is that correct?
Yes and no. So certainly drinking more water is better than not drinking any water. Even just increasing your water intake, you're going to notice amazing differences in your energy levels and in your ability to focus and in your mood and in your body in general and your skin health and all of that. So most people aren't getting even enough cold water. But of course, if we can upgrade to diamond water, that's going to make all the difference. But I also just want to stipulate that when we talk about hydration, and this is something that I think gets missed really often in my work, I'm noticing lately. So this is why I kind of really just want to comb over this point, is that hydration actually doesn't have as much to do with water that we drink at all. When I talk about hydration, people are like, oh, I should drink more water. And that is important. And that's great. And especially it's mineral rich, electrolyte rich water, structured water. I've seen that do absolute miracle healings. Truly, truly no qualms in calling them miracles. But what's more important than the water that you drink is the water that is inside your body. Because some water can dehydrate you, it can flash flood through you, and you just end up, going to the bathroom and just peeing all the time. And some of the water you drink, it can actually strip from your body the high quality metabolic structured deuterium depleted water that your cells create. It's called metabolic water. And it's like each one of your cells actually has a living spring inside of it that is through the Krebs cycle and some various other processes is constantly creating and generating fresh, highly structured and deuterium depleted water. So deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen. So when we're talking about H2O, when it's in the body, we're talking about H3O2, but it's not even necessarily that. It could be protium hydrogen, or it could be deuterium hydrogen. So then it would be like D3O2. And it's really, really important to pay attention to that isotope, because that is, we're finding one of the most profound influencers in states of chronic disease is what is the form of that water? What's the isotope of the water that's within you? So when we're talking about hydration, we're talking about not just how much water, which is what people assume. We're talking about the state of that water, the isotopic state of that water. We're talking about the structure of it. We're talking about the electrical conductivity of it. We're talking about the mineral profile of it. And we're talking about how well it can actually move through the body. Because if you're sitting still and stagnant all day, it doesn't matter how much water you drink, your cells aren't going to be nourished, because the hydraulic systems of your fascia and your lymphatic fluid, they only move when you do. And your fascia is what delivers water to every single cell in your body. But it can't get down into these little nooks and crannies if you're not moving. So actually, for most people, I would say movement is a more important factor in hydration even than drinking water. Because if you're drinking water, it doesn't matter if you're not moving in specific ways that can really push and massage and squeeze and pull that water into your cells. And then also for the lymphatic fluid, because hydration is not just a matter of absorbing water, it's also about being able to expel and detoxify through the different water channels in our body, especially the lymphatic fluid, and then to be able to convert that lymphatic fluid back and forth to blood through the lymph ducts. And again, that's something that's mediated entirely by your movement. So drinking water is important, but even I would say your diet is even more important than the water. No, let me rephrase that. So the water you drink is more important than the food that you eat, because if you're not well hydrated, you're not going to absorb the nutrients that you're eating, because water is what delivers all of the nutrients and the hormones and everything into your body. But most of us are eating dehydrating diets. So that's the way in which your diet is more important, because most of us are not eating our ancestral ways. And so we're eating diets that can actually give us, very flimsy cell membranes because of the kind of fats that are in our diet, which don't actually retain and absorb and mediate the osmotic flow of water. So that's a big consideration in hydration. And then another really big consideration in hydration is your exposure to EMFs and electromagnetic fields. And because we're spending so much time near Wi-Fi routers and computers and cell phones and all of that, your gap junctions, which are like these long concurrent fiber optic tubules or cables of electromagnetic energy in between one cell cytoplasm and the next, they start to resonate at a different frequency than they were designed to. And there's an exact direct correlation between hydration and electrical conductivity. That's why the way that we measure someone's hydration is to measure their phase angle, or how much electricity they can pass through the cell membranes. Because all the electricity, all the prana, all the chi in your body is hydroelectric energy. It's generated hydroelectrically in your cells. And so when we're around strong man-made electromagnetic currents, we cannot absorb water. So even if you're drinking the highest quality water, even if your diet is on point, even if you're getting good movement and all of these other factors of hydration, you won't be able to absorb the water, because water is a dipolar molecule. And in the presence of EMFs, it can actually switch its polarity, sometimes, thousands of times per second. And that's not stable. It's not natural. And it means we're becoming dehydrated. So I just wanted to comb over that real quick, because people, a lot of times I'm noticing lately, like, people hear my work and they're like, oh, it's all about water, I should drink more water. And you're like, yeah, cool, do that. But also hydration is really these 5 other factors just as much or more so than the water that you drink.
Right. So not just what you drink, what you eat, you're moving, and your exposure to EMF, that's all super important. So I can imagine that the amount of electrification of our atmosphere, would that also be impacting the health of the water that's in nature outside of our bodies?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. In fact, what's interesting is that Victor Schauberger, because he could see the way that we were treating water in our environment, including through the electromagnetic fields that were just starting to become a thing in during his time, in the late 1800s, he could see that water was becoming more and more unstable, more and more destructured. And, he saw the direction that humanity was headed as a result of our treatment of water. Because, like we said before, what we do to water, we do to ourselves. So what we're doing to our water on a massive scale is being reflected back to us in all of the psychological and social and economic instability that we're seeing in the world. And he laid out, if we don't change our relationship to water, we're going to run into massive worldwide drought, climate change, global madness, ignorance, mayhem. Our water on Earth is the blood of the earth. And so when we have no respect for her, and that includes irradiating her with electromagnetic fields toxicity. It includes, of course, polluting her. It includes rerouting rivers so that they no longer meander, but they just flow in straight lines. It includes the flood irrigation practices that are just enormously wasteful. It includes the virtual water trade that's happening around the world. It includes using water as a carrier for chemical weapons and pesticides. It includes all of the areas in the Middle East where water is literally being used as a weapon of war. And I would argue in some ways it's even being treated that way in the United States, but that's another topic. And, when we look at all these ways that water is being disrespected, we wouldn't treat our worst enemy that way. We wouldn't treat an animal that way. It would be inhumane, it would be cruel, and we would go to jail. And yet we treat the body of life itself in that way. And as a result, we're seeing massive worldwide floods and tsunamis and typhoons and drought, and water itself is the way that climate change is manifesting. Like, carbon's not going to kill us, right? But it's the way that that water reacts to all of this by disappearing or by being, moving to the wrong places, too much here, not enough there. That's really the danger of climate change. And there are some really interesting scientists right now who are talking about how, carbon only mediates 5% of energy transfer in our environment, in our atmosphere. Water actually mediates 95% of energy transfer in our environment. So it's kind of like a chicken or the egg thing. When you start looking deeper into climate change and its relationship to water, you can see that, water actually affects the Earth's climate far more so than carbon. And it's actually the depletion of the hydrological cycle that is at least as great, if not greater, cause of global warming, even than carbon.
Wow. Well, that's
which is a circuitous way of answering your question.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. You're really illustrating in a great way how exactly what we do to water, we do to ourselves, because we are water. And exactly what to the extent that we reduce or take a reductionistic view of living embodied water in our lives, that we reduce ourselves to nothing. And I really think that we're experiencing a loss of self-identity in relation to nature and our intimacy with nature. And what you're talking about is then akin to self-abuse. And you said we wouldn't treat our worst enemy that way, but we're treating ourselves that way. I think there's a loss of self-identity that's occurring that causes us to feel trapped in our own small, tiny version of reality. And it allows us to then take these seriously awful actions towards the planet and towards ourselves without realizing that we're doing it. So I'm starting to see a way that this kind of builds this story of like how our relationship to water and the lessons we can learn from her will help to guide us back towards a sense of connection and unity. So how now moving forward, like at this point where people are more divided, more afraid, more confused, more distracted than ever before, and less healthy, how can we start to ask these questions of water herself and our relationship to nature? And what's our move here? What's our move to go forward?
There's so many answers to this question. I love this question. And this is really what my work is all about. But it really, each person has their own entry point into how they most relate with life. And how we relate to water is how we relate to life. So depending on your interests and your fascinations, there is a doorway there for you to have more impact in the world through your work by doing so through water. So for example, if you are into human rights with regards to water is a huge issue because 80% of disease worldwide is caused by unclean drinking water. If you're into health and wellness, there's a doorway there for you through water because water is the most impactful way we can affect the health of our bodies, who are 99.95% water molecules. If you are into climate and the environment, like we just talked about, the water molecule can impact global climate faster than any other molecule on Earth, including carbon remediation and carbon sequestration. Restoring the watersheds is more important for that. If you are into women's rights issues, for example, that's very, very intimately tied into international water issues in ways that most people don't realize. But water has traditionally in every single culture been a woman's responsibility. That's why women will walk sometimes miles and miles just to go collect dirty water from a local waterway. So very, very closely tied into women's issues around the world. Like the thing that I recommend people do is just find what speaks to your heart, find what brings you alive, and connect with water as life through that, because we need every single person now more than ever. Water is calling each of us. And I think it really starts with that personal relationship with water. You can't really serve life and serve water and serve healing. There's this old proverb I really love. I forget where it comes from, but yeah, it says no healing without water. And it's so true, because all healing comes through the healing of the waters, collectively, personally, and from the micro to the macro. So start with that personal relationship. Start by finding your spring. Start by communing with water, by listening to water, by letting her imbue you with life and with wisdom and with direction. It's really a profound thing when she starts moving you. And then you start to realize that, we are each a drop of water, and we just get to steward. We are a way that water has of walking instead of flowing. And we steward this one drop of water for one lifetime, and then this water returns back into the watershed again. So we are affecting the world through this water. And water is one concurrent body. Water is one mass of consciousness. It's not aware of being a separate lake over here and you over here and me over here and the ocean over there and the rain over here. It's not conscious of being separate any more than you're conscious of being separate as your head and your hand and your foot. Water herself is all one living being. And I love what you said earlier about how, it's through water that we can really recognize the oneness and the unity of absolutely everything. And so, even spiritually getting in touch with that unity and that oneness and that interconnectedness, that will really guide your way into how you can make the most change and effect. So start drinking living water, let it bring you to life, and get in touch with your local watershed. Just like we know our address, we should know our watershed. We should know what our river basin is, where our springs are, the name of our watershed and all of that, because we can't protect what we don't know. We can't protect what we don't recognize. And, even now, even in the United States, a lot of a lot of our watersheds are being sold off and privatized, and this is really the most dangerous thing that that has caused so much suffering in the world, is the privatization of water, which is really commodifying it, and it has robbed so many human beings of access to life and created a water apartheid in the world between the global north and the global south, that most of us in the privileged west and in the privileged global north, water is so ubiquitous for us and so taken for granted that we don't realize that we already right now live in a world where if you can't afford water, you do not have the right to live. That's why 80% of disease worldwide is caused by unclean drinking water. So we need to get intimately connected with this issue, because right now we're at the crux of a shift that will determine for the rest of human history and all future generations whether or not people have access to the right to live, the right to water, without the ability to pay for it. This privatization question is so crucial. And the main companies who are privatizing water, they're like Suez, Veolia, Bechtel, RWE, Thames, you know, and there's this giant water cartel. They're the most evil and impactful people in the world that we've never even heard of. Most people have never heard of these companies, and yet they are the biggest murderous bullies in the world, but most of them are actually based in America. So we as Americans can actually impact greater global change from this seat of privilege than we realize. So getting involved with the questions of privatization is important. I really recommend getting involved with certain projects like the Blue Planet Project, for example, is really great. I have so much respect for the work that they do. Also, the rightsofnature.org, I think that's the URL. Rights of Nature, it's basically giving human rights and personhood to various bodies of water. There's also the earthlawcenter.org. If you go to codes.earth this year, we are vying for a world water law that would be a unifying prioritization legally of water around the world. And then there's another one. Oh, yeah, River Keepers. Oh, what is that? What it's called? River Keepers. Oh, it's run by RFKJ, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So it's one of my favorite nonprofits. I think it's called it's called Water Keepers Alliance. That's another one of my favorites. So the Blue Planet Project and Water Keepers Alliance are great ways for people to get involved.
Awesome. Wonderful. Great. Yeah, this is awesome. You've done an amazing job at really bringing the macro and the micro and the abstract and etheric and the practical and the hands-on approach here. And just want to reiterate something I'm hearing as this theme is that what we do in our own relationship is going to absolutely dictate our ability to even see ourselves as connected to the bigger picture at hand, and give us the doorway towards action. I mean, it really does seem like, and I shouldn't even use the word seems. I know you wholeheartedly believe this, that the answer to any question, or at least an answer, can really be found in water. And so we have to look at ourselves and figure out, are we doing what's necessary to nurture the body of water in our own bodies, that is our own bodies, so that we are fully prepared to then literally flow out into the world and nourish and nurture the bodies of water that we are together as a planet. And you've just made that so clear in this conversation. It's really amazing.
Oh, I'm so glad. And I really appreciate the opportunity to explore all of the nuances of this with you. It's really a treat to chat with someone who can understand sort of the interconnectedness and the micro and the macro. And, there's so many rabbit trails and wormholes to go into when it comes to water. But you're right. I fully and wholeheartedly believe that water holds the answers to everything, because it is the body of consciousness. It is the body of the Akashic records and all of the information in the universe. And I don't say that lightly, and I don't say that in a woo-woo kind of way. I've been studying water for 12 years, and I have yet to find a single important question that water doesn't hold the answers to. Right. And it's exciting. It's so excited because it means that you can study water your entire life and still only scratch the surface of it. There's always more to learn and more to allow water to teach you. And
right. Just really quick. So when you're talking about literally getting information from water, literally exchanging information in the water between our bodies, what is that? What is that property?
Well, when I'm talking about the way that we learn from water and we understand and listen to water, I'm talking more about quantum coherence and more about hydromancy.
Okay.
But when we talk about epitaxy and transference, that's a different principle of water. And that is the ability of anything that is highly structured and highly coherent, like a crystal, for example, or your own bio water that is structured, to have an influence on anything unstructured in its environment. So when there is chaos and disorder in the environment, if you bring something that has a high level of coherent resonance, it will bring more order into the environment. So the way that that manifests with water is, this is the reason why some people put crystals in their water. I think people overestimate the effect of crystals in your water, but it is one cool tool that you can have in your back pocket, because that crystal, because it holds coherence, because the molecules are aligned in a matrix, it will help the water to keep structure in its environment. It also means that when your body is highly, highly coherent, when you've been cultivating more crystallinity and more resonance in your own body, then you will affect the bodies of water that you swim in. You will affect water that you drink that goes back through you, back into the watershed. You will affect the bodies of water of people that you hug. You will become a literally physically healing presence on this planet. And it's also the way that, there's a company that I really love. I have lots of amazing, fun water alchemy tool things. But one of my top 10 favorites these days is from a company called Flaska that's out of Slovenia. And they actually use a process called TPS in the way that they create the glass of the bottles that they use. So the silicone in the glass is actually really highly structured, and they can imbue it with very specific structure that carries healing frequencies unique to your own body, depending on what you need. And so even just being in that glass, the water through epitaxy, through transference, does receive a level of crystallinity just from that.
Amazing. That's really cool. Right. And I know you have a ton of resources and ways to learn and deepen people's understanding that you have available through your avenues. So tell us really quickly, where can people find your information and your lessons that you've provided?
Yeah, so my website is waterislife.love. And I have a ton of free resources on there, free blogs and free videos and that sort of thing. The videos are all on YouTube or on the website. I also post a lot on Instagram. Usually once a day, I'll make some kind of water post on there, which is at Isabel Friend. And I also have 2 free webinars on my site. It's actually on my Teachable, on my Water Academy, which is waterislife.teachable.com. So 2 free webinars. The first one is called The Living Liquid Crystal, and that's basically an hour, or 70 minutes, I think, of just an overview of touching on the basics of everything that I feel everyone should know. So I think that's a good place to start, because that's like, what do I absolutely need to know about water? Just give it to me quickly. Then I just released another free webinar that is more about the aquatic body and an introduction to what I call holobiology, which is this holographic mirroring, or the way that water reflects hydrological systems within our bodies and in the earth. We have the same hydrological systems, and we need to honor them in the same ways. And then that one is actually kind of an introduction to my longer course that I just put out, which I'm really excited about. I actually made it specifically for healthcare practitioners, healthcare providers, nutritionists, doctors, whomever, to really understand the hydrological systems of the body and understand the health implications and health practices around being a body of 99.95% water. So that just came out. Super stoked about it. I love that. And I'm also adding to it all year. So
Awesome.
Hop on that. And then also my first course is that mini course that I mentioned earlier, which is just about drinking water. It's just about how to recognize the different kinds of water and then how to uplift and alchemize them back into living water again. So Right now, that's what I got for people.
Awesome. That sounds amazing. I will definitely be tuning into that practitioner course. It sounds incredible and extraordinarily applicable. So listen to water, learn from her, create coherence in your own body, and then put it into action by influencing the body of water that is the planet around us, whatever way calls to you. And if there's anything else, is there any other call to action, love message or inspiration or call to action that you have for people before we sign off here?
Yeah, go sing. Go sing a song to your water and have a drink of it and notice if you feel any different.
Awesome.
Just pay close attention. Just that's your homework for today. Doesn't matter what you sing. Doesn't matter if you think you're a singer or not. Even if you just hum to your water, just for like 5 minutes, and then drink it. Just see if you notice a difference.
Awesome. Should we have an emotional state that we try to maintain as we're drinking, as we're letting the water flow down our throat into our stomach?
Mm-hmm. It's funny you asked that because I actually just posted an ancient Chinese proverb the other day that says, when you drink the water, remember the spring. So definitely remember her as the blood of Mother Earth, and recognize that as you're tasting her, she's tasting you. As you see her, she's looking at you as well. And that communion, that reciprocity, that recognition kind of enlivens and aligns you both.
Awesome. That's beautiful. All right. I'm going to go do that. Thank you so much,
Awesome.
Isabel. I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation.
Ditto, Dan. Thanks so much for this. I've really, really enjoyed it, and look forward to more in the future.
Wonderful. Take care. I'll talk to you soon. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Take on Life with your host, Dr. Dan Continenza. This podcast is brought to you by Tone of Life Family Chiropractic and Wellness. Tone of Life specializes in helping children and families in the Northeast Ohio region achieve their health potential through gentle chiropractic and craniosacral care. To find out if you and your family can benefit from a healthier brain and nervous system, visit toneoflifeohio.com and schedule your free consultation today.